Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to Sunday worship at the First Unitarian Congregation of Ottawa. My name is Susan, and I am pleased to serve as worship associate this morning. Whether you are here in the sanctuary or taking part in this worship celebration from your home, or wherever else you may be, whenever you log on, you are welcome. We acknowledge that our FirstU campus is located on traditional, unsurrendered, and unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and that the work of reconciliation is a responsibility of our congregation and of all Canadians. Our goal is to educate ourselves and all who have ears to hear, to be of service to those who are at risk, and to advocate for justice. Do take care during this protracted pandemic, and take advantage of online opportunities at FirstU to stay in touch. If you are new to FirstU and would like to learn more about us, please contact us through our email at welcome@firstunitarianottawa.ca. Following the service, please join us for our virtual hospitality hour at 11:30. And now, here's Carl from the board with today's announcements.
Thank you. I'm wearing my Ukrainian shirt today to support my Ukrainian wife and show solidarity with those fighting in the face of tyranny, dishonesty, and violence and cowardice. There have always been and now are many things that can tempt us to be afraid and paralyze us into inaction and immobility. But always remember that one honest, good, compassionate heart outweighs millions of brainwashed, frightened souls trapped in a prison of delusion that somehow, in some way, we are divided and not one. That people of a different race, a different religion, a different place, a different culture, a different nationality, a different sexual orientation, a different gender identity, somehow we are not one. This is the lie that we all have been subjected to as human beings, and that somehow we are separate from nature. We are not separate from nature. Where nature goes, we go. Where animals go, we go. Where our neighbor goes, we go. So I'm just telling you all not to be afraid. And that's exactly why Putin and Trump and Bolsonaro and Bashar al-Assad are doing what they're doing, is because they're afraid. They're afraid of their fellow human beings. They're afraid of the truth. They're afraid of accountability, and we must not cower to that. And now for this morning's announcements. Good morning, FirstUers. We are now past the 2-year mark of adopting our ongoing focus on climate change. Please take just 3 minutes of your time to complete our climate survey, which is available online at the link provided in our weekly EUU, or you can complete and submit a paper copy at the back of the church. We really need better participation from our congregants so we know better how to focus and generate positive activity, and so we can move forward in making our home planet more sustainable for ourselves and future generations. And now, because we can use some good news, some excellent news from the UN's 5th Environmental Assembly in Nairobi, held last week, saw 175 nations sign a resolution to adopt an internationally legally binding agreement by 2024 to eliminate all plastic pollution over the full production and disposal life cycle. Our next congregational focus will be on plastics, so stay attuned to upcoming initiatives at FirstU, such as our Plastics Challenge, and an upcoming Earth Speaks Forum featuring Friends of the Earth CEO Bia Olivstari. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. During the continuing pandemic, we encourage you to sign up to receive the EUU, our weekly email newsletter. Check our Facebook and Instagram pages and our webpage for notices and updates. Our calendar continues to be as full as ever, although many events are online. Whatever your heritage, whatever your faith, whomever you love and however you identify, today you are a part of our spiritual community.
Bonjour, mes amis. Good morning, one and all, on this definitively March Sunday morning. An announcement of my own, maybe not as political as my brother Carl, but I do welcome you. News came to me yesterday that there will be a rally in support of the people of Ukraine on Parliament Hill at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I will be there, and I encourage any of you who wish to join me there as well. This morning, we are back in our fellow worship hall and streamed wherever you may be. We have a new AV system, which we are testing out this morning. The video earlier was a perfect way to christen that for our use. We light our chalice this morning, the symbol of our faith, to these words by my friend and colleague, Katie Kandarian Morris. Here we have come together in this sacred space, quieter now, with our readiness, hushed voices, hoping, trusting for so many things, for connection, for communion, for inspiration, for information, for healing, for wholeness, for words, for music, voices lifted together in song, for celebration and consolation. Here we have come into this space, bringing all of who we are. Let us be willing, however, we will be changed. Our chalice is lit, and now, Donna, it is time for our call to worship.
We want to welcome you today. Our service is marking Women's Day, which is on Tuesday. Gender equality is a right. Fulfilling this right is the best chance we have in meeting some of the most pressing challenges of our time, from economic crisis and lack of health care, to climate change, to violence against women, and escalating conflicts. Women are not only more affected by these problems, but they also possess the ideas and leadership to solve them. The gender discrimination still holding too many women back holds our world back too. While there has been progress over the last decades, many challenges still remain. In the past 2 years, for example, women worldwide have experienced setbacks due to the effects of COVID-19. It has made more obvious the fact that we are still struggling to change the structural foundations of inequality. And until those are removed and new foundations laid, we will not be able to count on gains being irreversible. Behavior change is a massive undertaking confronting unconscious bias and stereotyping. And this is one way to start the process. And now we go to our opening hymn, Building Bridges.
Between our divisions, I read. I'm Reverend Ellen Bell. I'm the spiritual care visitor for this congregation. At this time in the service, we accept personal joys and sorrows, and we recognize these by placing stones in water and allowing the ripples to carry those messages out to the universe, where they may be either commiserated with or congratulated. I put a stone of condolence for John Braden, who died of COVID. John was the husband of Anne, who was chair of the Go-Go Grannies. In the last week or 10 days or so, there has been more indication of suspected graves at Indian residential schools. A stone of sorrow and maybe hope for the war in Ukraine. And a reminder that COVID is still with us. It's on its way slowly, but it's still with us, so we must maintain vigilance. We are a caring congregation, and part of that caring is our caring network. And the caring network is back at the back of the sanctuary, and they have their table set up. And there is one caring card today. I know it's been a long time since we've had an opportunity to sign a caring card, but there is one today, and I hope everybody will stop by and sign it. It is a card of congratulations for Reverend Eric and his wife Anne, who are celebrating their 5th anniversary. And I put one last stone for all the joys and sorrows kept in our hearts. We will now have a moment of silence.
As I said on the bench over there, Reverend Ellen, you surprised me. And if you're watching, our secret is out. This morning, we join in the worldwide celebration of International Women's Day. If you'll permit a very short little story. The first congregation that called me to its minister had only one professional religious leader before me, the Reverend Dr. Elizabeth Selly Jones, who served that congregation for 18 years. When I was interviewing with the congregation and preaching, a young girl turned to her mother and asked, "Mama, you mean a minister can be a man?" Yes, darling, sometimes even a man. Although religious female leaders continue to show us the way, men have to dig deep to do as well as women do. In lieu of a traditional story for all ages this morning, we have a short video for you now on the global history of women's rights.
Women and girls are leaders, change makers, caretakers, and peacekeepers. But while they have an empowered role in our societies, to this day, women and girls are still forced to fight for their rights. How much progress have we achieved, and how much work remains? How can you carry on the fight for equal rights? women's struggle for equal rights is centuries old. But 1848 marked a watershed moment for women's rights with the Seneca Falls Convention, where women activists publicly petitioned for their civil, social, political, and religious rights. In 1893, New Zealand sent a message to other activists across the world that equal voting rights were achievable through advocacy. Entering the 20th century, women around the world are mobilizing in ever greater numbers to campaign for gender equality, just as women's role in the labor force is rapidly evolving by opening up options beyond caretaking roles. In 1945, the United Nations is formed in response to the destructive toll of 2 world wars, and Eleanor Roosevelt oversees the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For all the world to hear, she and other advocates underline the place of women's rights within. This sets a foundation for women's rights norms and standards at the international level. In the subsequent decades, just as women are taking historic leadership positions in government, women activists at the grassroots level dovetail with the worldwide momentum by becoming powerful symbols of feminist resistance and social change. This momentum reaches a climax in 1995 when the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action presents a visionary global agenda for women and girls' rights. But in spite of all the progress, as we enter the 21st century, patriarchal stigmas persist and exemplary leaders arise to resist them. With the rise of the digital age, social media emerges as a crucial tool to galvanize populations in the fight against injustice. A single woman's voice is now louder than ever. Grassroots activists trigger social movements online and offline, from cities to villages, inspiring future generations of women and girl leaders. After relentless campaigning, these movements generate changes in policy that signal a true shift in international attitudes and practice towards equal rights. Where are we now? A quarter century after the Beijing Declaration, women and men must mobilize together to overcome the remaining obstacles to gender equality. They must fight for an end to gender-based violence, for access to healthcare, for equal pay, and for equal participation in political life. The ink isn't dry. Be a part of generation equality, and let us continue to write history together.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Rosemary Nagy. Dr. Nagy is a professor in the Department of Gender Equality and Social Justice at Nipissing University, which is on the traditional lands of the Nipissing First Nation, protected under the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. From 2013 to 2020, Rosemary served as co-director of the Northeastern Ontario Research Alliance on Human Trafficking, which is NORAT in the acronym. NORAT worked with service providers, trafficking survivors, and sex workers in order to identify regional gaps and barriers to service provision for women experiencing violence in the sex industry. NORAT took a decolonial, Indigenous, and feminist approach to its work. Welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today to speak about becoming a settler ally to Indigenous women, girls, cis, trans, and two-spirit peoples. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm grateful to be here on these unceded lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. So if I could have the first slide, please. One of my starting points, although it is perhaps obvious, is that Indigenous women are not a singular group. There are 50 First Nations in Canada, as well as Métis and Inuit peoples, with 50 Indigenous languages across this land we call Turtle Island. And there are also political differences, like any group. This became abundantly clear to me on my research on sex work and human trafficking. Some Indigenous women understand prostitution and human trafficking to be one and the same. Other Indigenous women clearly distinguish between sex work and trafficking. Some Indigenous women want to see prostitution completely criminalized and abolished, while others call for the decriminalization of prostitution and the application of labor rights. What is common between these two positions, however, is a desire to eliminate sexualized, racialized violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. As Cree academic Dr. Robin Bourgeois remarked to the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Women, quote, "We want our girls and our women to be safe no matter what." So I don't actually plan to speak any more about the sex industry per se, but rather to spend the next 5 minutes sketching the relationship between gender-based violence and settler colonialism. This is because the first step on becoming a settler ally is to educate yourself and others, and I hope what I can say here might be of some use. And then in the remaining time, I'll provide some concrete suggestions on becoming a settler ally. And I would note here that ally is only a practice, not an identity you can claim for yourself. So next slide, please. It's helpful to think of the goals and operation of settler colonialism in terms of three main intersecting and mutually reinforcing logics. That is land dispossession, white supremacy, and heteropatriarchy. Land dispossession is the driving force behind settler colonialism. It is the key reason, obviously, for our presence here on Turtle Island. Ottawa, as you know, is occupying unceded territory. Even in areas where there are treaties, the legitimacy of Crown sovereignty is questionable due to reliance on the doctrine of discovery or the idea that this was empty land. And this, of course, ties in further to resource extraction and capitalism. White supremacy, I don't think I need to dwell on this. It is the idea of racism and also righteousness in the civilizing mission of colonization, and the naturalization and justification of seeing Indigenous peoples as less than human. And then heteropatriarchy, referring to male domination and heteronormativity, or the imposition of heterosexual values, relates to the imposition of European gender roles and power structures, including the murder and ostracization of Two-Spirit people, the dismantling of matrilineal or gender egalitarian Indigenous governance structures, and concerted structural and sexual violence directed against Indigenous women and girls. And I'll just quote an anti-colonial scholar named Andrea Smith. She's done extensive research in a book called Sexual Conquest. Quote, "Because Indian bodies are dirty, they are considered sexually violable and rapeable. That is, in patriarchal thinking, only a body that is pure can be violated. The rape of bodies that are considered inherently impure or dirty simply does not count." And so these three logics work together and culminate in genocide. And I would use the term genocide, not cultural genocide, just genocide. Next slide, please. So it's important to remember that settler colonialism is a structure, not an event that happened in 1492. These structures still exist. Most obviously, the 1876 Indian Act, which is the basis for quote-unquote Indian status. Historically, Indigenous women who married out, that is, married a non-status man, lost their status and therefore their tribal membership, access to land, housing, and even burial rights. And this, of course, reduces the number of status Indians who can lay claim to the remaining reservation land. Despite court cases, successful complaints to the United Nations, and legislative amendments, remnants of the marrying out clause remain embedded in the Indian Act. Other ways in which these logics intersect, of course, is the ostensible goal of residential schools, one of which was to produce, quote, good Christian wives, in addition to seeking to eliminate Indigenous languages and cultures. Another example that I think clearly shows the connections between land dispossession, racism, and sexism is that historically Indigenous women who were out of place, i.e. off reserve and in violation of past laws being in urban areas, were criminalized as prostitutes. And the conflation of race, gender, and moral impurity continues through today in the treatment of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, as well as their families, when they are dismissed by police and society as unworthy of investigation or care. Next slide, please. So, to be an ally to Indigenous women requires recognizing the centrality of land in their experiences of violence, healing, resistance, and self-determination. Decolonization is no less than the return of Indigenous life and land. Anti-racist work by itself is not enough. Mainstream feminist work is not enough and can even be harmful. Indigenous feminisms emphasize sovereignty, the self-determination of Indigenous peoples, and the self-determination of Indigenous women. Next slide, please. I also want to be careful. I don't want to paint what Eve Tuck calls a damage-centered picture about Indigenous women, because this kind of thinking leads to the helping imperative, which I'll discuss a little bit more in a bit. It's important to emphasize and acknowledge the strength and resistance of Indigenous women who have fought colonial subjugation for centuries, keeping their languages, knowledges, and cultures alive, anchoring their communities, particularly as mothers, aunties, and grandmothers, healing, speaking out, protesting, and working for everyday change. Your job is to support them, not to speak or act for them. Next slide, please. Now for some concrete suggestions. Please try to avoid thinking about helping Indigenous people. The desire to help is no doubt heartfelt, but it may be rooted and will most likely appear to be rooted in the colonial history of civilizing and saving Indigenous peoples. Our job is not to fix the quote-unquote native problem, to use the long-standing term, but to fix the settler problem. So although helping an Indigenous person may well be appropriate in a specific situation, this will not challenge the larger structures of oppression. Decolonization is not easy. It is an uncomfortable and unsettling experience. It is not about feeling bad for Indigenous peoples. It is not about feeling guilty. It is not wanting to close a dark chapter in our history. It is about changing ourselves and our society for here and now. So don't ask Indigenous people to teach you about their experiences of colonization. That is not their job, and indeed it can be traumatizing for them. Teach yourself and other settlers about ongoing colonialism as an ongoing structure in our society. Call out racist jokes. Immerse yourself in Indigenous literature and cultures. When Indigenous people do offer insights and experiences, accept the hard truths that they are telling us. Be humble, listen more, and speak less. The sharing space is not about you. And then also really important is this idea of critical self-reflection. Be grounded in your own ancestral history so you're not a wannabe Indigenous person. Have an honest awareness of your own privileges, biases, and mistakes. And I should be clear, you will probably make mistakes. I know I definitely have blundered and will no doubt continue to do so. So grow, learn, and be humble. Next slide, please. A couple other concrete points. Learn your treaty rights and obligations, although that does not apply here. But we can also push our government to respect treaty, to engage in respectful and fair treaty negotiations, to implement a fulsome and robust understanding of free, prior, and informed consent, to respect human rights tribunal decisions, not appeal court cases. Make use of your privilege in support of Indigenous-led actions. This can be giving money, your resources, your platforms. Join protests and campaigns, work to build coalitions. And I would really emphasize here the importance of building relationships and relationality as a form of accountability. And show up to events or workshops, and as I mentioned, be accountable to the people you aim to support. So last slide, please. I've just shared some other resources. I would also add there are some excellent podcasts out there, such as Two Crees in a Pod, All My Relations, Finding Cleo. These are all sorts of things where you can learn to inform yourself and hopefully build on beyond raising your consciousness toward taking action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosemary. It's been certainly very educational for all of us to hear your talk and encourage us all by your series of ways in which we can all become allies. In fact, some of us here today are wearing this red dress in solidarity with the fight against the actions that led to missing and murdered women, girls, and two-spirited persons. I would like to take a moment to talk a little bit more about how we can become allies ourselves. My name is Gay Stinson. I had an event in my life when I unintendedly, if that's a word, inadvertently became an ally of a person that I didn't really know very well. We worked together in an office, and I noticed that she was upset one day, and I just went over and said, you know, what's wrong? I put my arm around her, and she started to cry. And she started to explain the family situation that she was in, where her daughter was a drug user, her boyfriend was a drug pusher, and between them they had become pregnant. And the daughter had the plan of having her daughter adopted through a private agency where the child would be shipped off to Florida, to a couple in Florida who wanted a child. And in return, she was having all of her expenses paid and her college dues paid and so on, so she could go back to school. But this woman I was trying to comfort was simply heartbroken. She was sobbing that my grandchild, this is going to be my grandchild, and he will be lost to the family forever. And she just sobbed in my arms, and I thought, you can help. You can take custody. You can become the grandma. You can adopt this child as a grandma. As the family link, you can be considered eligible to adopt this child yourself. You can do it. She said, oh, I can't do it again. I just can't be a single mother raising a child again. And I said, yes, you can do it. You have a permanent job. You have a good salary. You own your own home. You can do it, and I will help you. There ensued about a year, maybe even more than a year and a half, of very nasty fighting between the grandma and her daughter. And the Children Family Services being involved about who could have custody and not have custody and who was the right person and not the right person, during which time I supported this woman, especially when she was feeling really low and she couldn't do it. She was beaten down and just couldn't do it anymore. I went with her to court. I wrote her a letter of support and recommendation that was used, in fact, in her suit for becoming the custodial parent. And eventually, at the end of the story, what happened is she did get custody of this grandchild. She did adopt this child as her child. The daughter, meanwhile, had straightened herself out and did go to college, a 2-year course, after which she got a job. And in the subsequent years, the daughter, the mother, and the grandchild started slowly and carefully working out the steps to become a family together. So that's my story about how inadvertently and from a casual relationship you can become an ally. I'd like to invite Justine, there we go. I'd like to invite Justine to come up and tell us about her experience.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So my name's Justine DeJager. My wife Tara and I have been congregants at FirstU for almost 4 years now. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who organized today's service, for Gay's remarks, and for Dr. Nagy for her remarks as well. So I am a lesbian white settler woman. As such, I've experienced both privilege and oppression. I've had to step up as an ally and have witnessed great allyship. I realize the fact that I'm fully outfitted by Golf Town might give you a bit of a clue as to my sexual orientation, but I thought I'd name it explicitly. Maybe that got a laugh at home. Okay. Now, I first remember learning about allyship when introduced to Dr. Lynn Giel's Ally Bill of Responsibilities, which was mentioned in this morning's presentation. Dr. Giel is an Algonquin Anishinaabe Kwe from the Ottawa River Valley. She details 16 responsibilities that should be upheld by folks engaging in allyship, and I think it's worth a Google. The last item reads, accept the responsibility of learning and reading more about their role as effective allies. All to say that allyship is a verb and not a noun. It is not a title we hold, but something that we must continually work on. We always have something new to learn. I work in Canada's labour movement, and the principle of solidarity is obviously an important one there, but not just in the world of unions and picket lines, but I think in all facets of our society. The principle essentially is that an injury to one is an injury to all. That I may not have your shared lived experiences, but I support your fight and feel confident that you will support mine. But supporting doesn't mean owning. How can I be supportive of movements led by racialized or Indigenous people as a white woman? I think, one, take a step back and ask what is needed. It's probably not centering my voice by taking media interviews or dictating strategy. It may be as simple as leveraging resources, whether financial or material. Two, learn about the issues at hand. Our world is a complex one, and one in which we are increasingly siloed into echo chambers of our own values and opinions. Leave some space for nuance. Remember that members of any community may have diverse opinions on a given issue. Read widely, remember that everyone is someone's child, and everyone ought to be treated with dignity and compassion. Three, remember that these fights are not historical, but happening right now and require real action. It's one thing for me to say that I support religious freedom, and quite another for me to publicly denounce the firing of my Muslim sisters choosing to wear a hijab to work. It is one thing to say that I support truth and reconciliation, and quite another to support the financial resources required to pay restitution to communities and to ensure basic human rights are respected by ending things like boil water advisories. Personally, as a person of faith, I try to ask how I can best love God's creation in all its diversity and demonstrate my commitment to this faith beyond thoughts and prayers and through action. But I will make mistakes. I have made many mistakes. I am imperfect, as we all are. I've decided that I can only ask, how will I react when I make these mistakes in the future? Will I dwell in them, or will I apologize, then treat myself with self-compassion so that I can show compassion productively to others moving forward? As a social justice-oriented congregation, I hope that today and all days we put in the hard work, yes, but never forget the importance of this compassion. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. While the choir comes up here for our anthem, I'd like just to encourage all of you to have some self-reflection about this. What does it mean to you to be an ally? What sorts of things can you remember when others were your ally? And what does it mean to be an ally to an individual and to an organization? If you wish to speak more about this or share your stories, I can meet you in the hospitality hour that takes place after the service.
With the
As you may know, we've not been collecting Sunday service offerings for almost 2 years now. This morning, we're back to our standard practice of passing the baskets. However, these days are not the status quo. We are collecting not only for the continued well-being of our faith community, but also in partnership with our neighbors on Byron Avenue at the Ukrainian Orthodox Cathedral of Ottawa for humanitarian assistance for the people of Ukraine. There is information on how to support the people of Ukraine in this week's EUU, including a link to a list of needed items. Scroll down from the top until you come to the bright yellow section. If you wish to donate to Ukraine by cash or check this morning, please put it in one of the envelopes that you will find in the pews. Be sure to fill in the information on the front of the envelope and indicate that the donation is for Ukraine. If you don't have time to get this done before the basket reaches you, you may bring your envelope to the welcome table at the back of the pews after the service. You may also go to our website or contact our finance manager to find out how to make a donation or keep up with your pledge and to be generous in supporting the people of Ukraine. Our gifts are freely given and gratefully received. We dedicate these gifts to the work of our community of faith, serving human wholeness, caring for the planet, upholding religious freedom, welcoming the stranger, loving one another.
Before we begin to close this time of worship, information, inspiration, and reflection, a reminder that our hospitality hour will begin at 11:30 on Zoom. As we prepare now to extinguish our morning's chalice, let these words by Christine Robinson, and as inspired by the second psalm, be our guide. Why are the nations in an uproar? Why do the peoples mutter and threaten? Why do the rich plot with the powerful? They are rebelling against the demands of love and justice. God laughs, cries, and says with anger, I have set my love in your hearts and my justice in your minds. You are my children, and I have given you the universe, your lives, and the tasks of your days. Be wise, be warned. Stick with the paths of love and justice. Your restless hearts will find me there. This morning's chalice is extinguished, but our connections and our faith remain. With that said, Jen, will you bless us once more?
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Coule dans mes mains, vie d'espoir et de justice. Tenez-moi, ciel emporte-moi, source de vie, viens vers moi, viens vers moi.
Thank you, Jen. A reminder, our hospitality hour will begin at 11:30. We are pleased that Dr. Nagy, today's speaker, will be joining us for those who wish to continue that conversation. My friends, go in peace, go in love, go in joy, practicing the art of extending the care and the vision to be the best allies we can be, remembering that to ally is a verb and not a noun. And now our postlude.